So, today's episode, we want to talk about almost like the correlation between procrastination and stress. And we want to give you a strategy. It's actually Melissa's strategy for how she breaks out of that like procrastination rut. It's something that's super simple. It literally only takes 2 minutes to do. But I think it's an important topic because a lot of people deal with procrastination. And a lot of times you turn it around on yourself and you look at yourself and you're like, I'm just being lazy or I'm being unmotivated. But the more that you start to blame yourself, right? Like the more you kind of like get into this procrastination spiral because you just feel like crap about yourself. Um, and that kind of like, doubles down on the fact that, well, you feel like crap about yourself. So what's the point? So I'm just going to like put it off till tomorrow. And you're just constantly making your to-do list like bigger and bigger and bigger. What we want to talk about in this episode is how procrastination, it might not have anything to do with being lazy or being unmotivated, and it might have everything to do with the fact that you are chronically stressed. Okay, so that's what we want to get into. And I want to kind of set the stage because I am the queen of procrastination. I kind of, just similar to you, and I feel like everyone in her family, we're like, we work better under pressure. I really wish I didn't have that narrative in my head. You know what I mean? Because I want to be the person where I'm like, you know what? I'm not scrambling for a dress for my sister-in-law's wedding the day before I leave. I want to have my suitcase packed for vacation 3 days beforehand and not doing it at like, 2 hours before my flight. I want to be like that. But I feel like procrastination is a big part of who I am, like what I do and how I show up. And I even remember being back in college, I had my senior like thesis that was due. So it was 15 pages and the night before I only had 2 pages of the thesis written. So I had to sit there, like this is like 90% of my grade. And I had to sit there and write like, 13 more pages. I stayed up all night long. I think I stress ate like an entire bag of pretzels. But that was like the core story of my procrastination. But I do feel like it's something that I just naturally do in my life. I procrastinate. I mean, do you feel like you're a procrastinator? Because is that like something that runs in our family?
I well, I think this is also really important because I think that there are differences in like that type of procrastination and then procrastination that almost feels like it's a habit. Like there are things that just like basic things that you want to do, that you need to do, and you just can't help but put it off. Um, like for example, like I've been there, of course. I think everyone has where they've put off like packing their suitcase to the last minute, put off like writing a paper. For me, procrastination has been it was really bad last year. It's been kind of bad recently, but where my procrastination struggle is like getting out of bed, like getting out of my pajamas to get dressed some mornings. Even like there have been days where I'm like, the thought of even leaving my apartment and getting to the elevator, going down the elevator and walking outside to go for a walk outside and get fresh air, I would put off all day long and then be like, oh my gosh, I didn't get any fresh air today. And that had happened for like days. Things like, I have chicken like I bought chicken like pre-diced and ready to cook, and I just can't bring myself to turn the stove on and cook the chicken. So that is where, and I think for a lot of people, they feel that way. Um, and it really does make you feel like that type of procrastination in particular. That's what makes you feel really lazy because it's like, well, I want to do these things. Why am I not doing it? I must just be lazy.
Yeah, and because it's like it serves a purpose. It's good for you, right? And it's different when you almost are looking at things that you're extrinsically motivated by, where it's like, you have to file a report for work by a certain time. Like, yes, you have to do that because it's part of your job. You have to like do it in order to get paid. But there is that like extrinsic motivation versus more of the intrinsic motivation where it's like, that if you go outside and you go for a walk and you get fresh air and you do like meal prep, your chicken, and you have some protein on hand for the week, things like that are all things that make you feel better, make you feel set up for success for the week, and make life easier. So it's like they're all of these things that you want to do, but yet you're still in this habit or almost like this rut of constantly delaying taking action on everything, right? And like you said, I think we've all been there, especially looking at like, a mile long to-do list. But when it starts to become that habit, when it becomes ritual and it becomes your new norm, where even the simplest things you're putting off, and even the things that make you feel better when you do it, you're putting off, this is where it becomes a different discussion. And this is really where we need to kind of parse the difference between talking about procrastination because you're being lazy and you're being lazy versus procrastination because you are actually stuck in a chronic stress mode.
Yeah, and I think that when you are procrastinating and you're procrastinating on the things that I was just, referring to, um and when you do feel lazy, you do think I just need more willpower. I just need more motivation. And when I learned that it wasn't that, it was actually something else happening in your brain that's making those very simple tasks feel impossible, it really was so eye-opening, and it was really helpful for me to understand why I act the way that I act. So that thing that's happening inside of your brain is stress. Okay, so do you want to talk a little bit about like the science behind, or like the correlation between procrastination and stress?
Yeah. So when we're talking about stress, we have to talk about cortisol, right? So just I know like this is where we kind of like pop our like little nerd hats on and we like to kind of dig into the science behind things because like you said, it's really helpful to understand why you're acting a certain way, why you're behaving a certain way, why you're thinking a certain way. And it almost like not that it like takes the responsibility away from you, but it almost like lets you stop blaming yourself or having those negative thoughts of thinking like I'm just lazy or like I'm just unmotivated, I'll never get my shit together, right? So going back to the whole idea of stress and how it can turn into, stress can become like procrastination, make that your new norm. If we're talking about stress, like I said, we have to talk about cortisol. Cortisol is your stress hormone. And I want you to think of it almost like as your body's built-in alarm system, right? So when something happens, your brain kind of sends out this SOS signal, and your adrenal glands, they respond by releasing cortisol to help you deal with that stressful situation. And I know cortisol gets a bad reputation, but cortisol, like at its core, it's not a bad thing, right? Cortisol is really helpful because it gives your body a quick energy boost. It helps to really like sharpen your focus. It helps to prep your body to take action. Like I want you to think about it almost like as your body's version of like it's your superhero cape, right? Like it's your Superman cape, your Superwoman cape. It helps you get into that like fight or flight mode to, either fight the threat or to flee from the threat. It's really, really helpful. And the whole like when you think about cortisol and your body releasing cortisol, I think it makes the most sense when you think about it back like when we were primal people, right? Like back in the caveman days, we needed to have that type of built-in warning system almost because we were constantly facing physical threats, right? Like getting chased by a saber-toothed tiger, being attacked by a neighboring tribe. Like those are immediate physical threats to your reality. So knowing the purpose of cortisol, you can see why cortisol would be really helpful in those isolated cases, like those one-off cases, because you would need more energy, you would need more focus, you would need more intense action to deal with those situations, right? So when you're like listening to this and you think about cortisol, cortisol is great and it's super helpful for your body when you have isolated incidents of stress. And this is where like you hear about a car like backs over a child and 130-pound mom all of a sudden has the strength and the adrenaline to lift a car up off of a child. It's because that surge of adrenaline, that surge of cortisol It's an isolated stress incident, and it get like all of everything, the focus, the strength, the energy, everything just kind of like, floods her body in order to take action. And that's great when it's isolated. The problem becomes when your stress is chronic. Do you want to talk a little bit about, because I know this is something that you have a lot of experience with, especially, last year breaking out with shingles and things like that. Talk about the problem with stress when it becomes chronic instead of isolated, and how cortisol can, like, when cortisol becomes your body releasing cortisol becomes something that is chronic, how that becomes problematic.
Yeah. So kind of like what you were just talking about, where, back in our primal days when we were cavemen, we had those constant physical threats. So that cortisol, those cortisol spikes, they were really good things to keep us, surviving. Today, most of the threats that we experience, and, like threats in quotations, right? Like most of the threats that we experience are mental or they're emotional threats. Okay, things like your kids are being little brats, they're not doing their homework, you got into an argument with your husband, like you have work deadlines, like all of the things that like are minor stresses throughout the day, that add up to almost like keep you in this chronic stress mode. Okay, the thing is that is really important for you to understand is your brain doesn't know the difference between a physical threat or a mental and emotional one. So it can't tell the difference between being chased by a saber-toothed tiger, or getting a stressful email from your boss, or being ready to lose your shit on your kids because they won't do their homework, or get they're running late for school in the morning, right? So if you're constantly juggling work deadlines, with family responsibilities and all of life's chaos, right? Your body is essentially stuck in fight mode and in fight or flight mode. So imagine like being permanently chased by a saber-toothed tiger. That's essentially where your body is. Even though your mind is not there because that's not truly happening, your body doesn't know the difference. So that means that your cortisol levels, they stay elevated.
Mhm.
And that is where things start to break down.
Right. Because so when you're talking about things starting to break down, you're talking about it in like the arena of the chronic stress that you're experiencing all throughout the day, in terms of your body just constantly pumping out cortisol. And this is the part that you need to understand, and how it's going to impact like your motivation and the procrastination that you feel like you're experiencing every single day, even though like you want to do the things, you're not doing it, right? So the sciencey part of this,
I
when you're
just want to add, like, really quickly, like when we're talking about things breaking down, just to kind of like paint the picture, right? Things that are breaking down are physical, mental, emotional, and behavioral. Everything that you feel, that you're doing, your body, everything starts to break down when you are living with elevated cortisol levels permanently and you are under chronic stress.
right. And in like for this episode, we're going to talk about just one of like the behavioral components that are impacted by high cortisol, which is procrastination, right? And why it doesn't mean, like, if you are procrastinating, it doesn't mean that you're lazy. It doesn't mean that you're unmotivated. It's just because your cortisol is chronically high, right? So when your cortisol is high, your body's experiencing stress. Cortisol floods it's called your prefrontal cortex. It's the front of your brain. And that's the part that helps you make decisions. It helps you to think clearly. It helps you to plan, and it helps you to react quickly. Okay. So, again, bringing this back to caveman days, right? If you are a caveman that is all of a sudden like you're face to face with a saber toothed tiger, having cortisol flood your prefrontal cortex, which again makes you able to think about reacting quickly, but less able to think clearly, less able to plan, but just take action, just react. This is useful because you don't need to think that much, right? Like if you're face to face with a saber-toothed tiger, you're not thinking, you're not planning, you're not doing anything. You just need to run, right? You need to act quickly to survive. You're either going to run or you're going to fight the thing, right?
Imagine, right. And like imagine those of you who do overthink everything, imagine that not working the way it's supposed to, and you're sitting there being like, shit, like should I run this way? Should I run that way? Should I jump in the tree? And if you're overthinking, by the time you're thinking about it, you're dead. Right. So
right.
when that cortisol kicks in, it's just that instant fight or flight mode. Take action.
Right. So we're not thinking clearly. We're not planning. We are just reacting. That is it, right? You just need to act quickly to survive. It makes sense. The thing that also happens, right, is you start to realize that like your instincts are sharpened, your focus on that immediate threat, like that is something that's super helpful. And like Melissa said, you're not in this process of like overthinking or like, over worrying about like, what am I going to do? You're just taking action. Okay. Even like in your life today, I want you to think about that way. When you are stressed about a singular task, right? Like a work deadline, or if you went back to school for your MBA, or a master's degree, or like, so you have a school assignment, right? Or even something simple like you have all of your family coming over and you need to like do a stress clean of the house, right? Your body is still releasing cortisol to help you manage that pressure and manage that stress. And in the short term, that's fine. It makes sense because it's gearing you up to take action. It's making you feel alert. It's making you ready to like, jump in and tackle that task and just get shit done. The problem is though, is when that stress is prolonged, right? It's too long. You constantly have like deadline after deadline after deadline, right? Or, the stuff in your house has built up so much that you're like, I don't even know what room to start in. Like, it's just overwhelming. Your body keeps pumping out cortisol, and having that prolonged exposure and that prolonged release of cortisol, that's where it starts to have a negative effect on your brain. And that's where the procrastination comes from. So, do you want to talk a little bit about like, why procrastination is almost like a stress response, like a survival mechanism almost?
Yeah, yeah. So exactly what you said. Procrastination is a stress response. It is a survival mechanism. So when your body is stressed, procrastination can actually feel like the safest option in that moment, right? So like by avoiding the tasks that you know that you need to do, that you want to do, your brain thinks that it's protecting you from added overwhelm, right? But in reality, it's just keeping you stuck. So this can show up in a few different ways. And I kind of want to like run through some of them because for some of you, it's going to be different than others. So the very first one that I want to talk about, and this is something that I know I have dealt with personally, is it will impair your decision making abilities, right? So the more stressed you get about a task, right, the harder it becomes to make rational decisions. So instead of thinking, oh, I need to start working on XYZ, your brain gets stuck in avoidance mode. You just avoid it altogether, right? It's not rational thought. You might find yourself scrolling through social media or watching TV because the stress has overwhelmed your prefrontal cortex, right? That the front part of your brain that controls focus and decision making, like Jess was just talking about. Okay, so in a way, procrastination, it becomes a defense mechanism to essentially escape the discomfort that is caused by the stress, right? So I'm sure that some of you have been there before where like you are so stressed and you're like, someone asks you what's for dinner and you're like, I can't even fucking think about what to make for dinner right now. You're not even thinking rationally, right?
You
So that,
know, it's funny that you say that because when I think back to like the height of stress, maybe like a year ago when, I'd gained a ton of weight and I just felt like at my absolute worst. I remember like the work was piling up. I had so much to do, like, when it came to my clients and when it came to emails and when it came to like, new projects that we were working on. And I just remember being like, oh my gosh, I have so much to do, but I could not stop scrolling on my phone. I didn't want to be on my phone. I could give a shit what I saw on Instagram, but I was literally like toggling Instagram, Facebook, Instagram, Facebook, Instagram to the point where I was like, I need to like throw my phone out the window. And I thought that there was something wrong with me, like, oh my God, am I just addicted to my phone? When I first learned that, like, this is not something that's actually wrong with you. It's a defense mechanism, it's almost a survival mechanism. It made so much more sense.
Yeah, and I think like that's why this conversation is so important. Like we were just talking about, like you have to understand why you're acting the way that you do. Otherwise, you will just continue in this high stress mode. You're going to keep procrastinating, and it's this like terrible cycle of, because you're stressed you procrastinate, because you procrastinate you're more stressed, and you just keep like you stay stuck in the cycle. Right?
Yeah.
So we need to really like have an understanding about why this is happening, how to fix it. Okay? Um Another thing that, that this will do is it will it doesn't, like when you're really stressed, it takes away from you being able to concentrate. Okay? So your decision making is impaired and now we can't concentrate. Okay? When cortisol levels are high, your brain's ability to prioritize tasks, to think clearly, all of that starts to decline. Okay. And a lot of us like will get paralyzed by whatever pressure we're under, even though the task is important, you just feel almost paralyzed. You're absolutely frozen. You're not doing anything. Okay. And the stress, it makes it hard to concentrate, which, like I just said, leads to more procrastination because you put off the task. And then eventually it becomes so overwhelming. Again, you just don't take action at all. Um, Another problem is memory problems, right? So those of you who maybe this is like maybe really hitting home and you're like, oh my gosh, I am chronically stressed. I'm so beyond stressed. And maybe recently you've been having issues remembering things, right? So chronic stress impacts your hippocampus, right? And that plays a key role in memory. So if you're constantly stressed, you might forget important details about a project that you had to do. You might miss deadlines. I know that was a big one. Or like, I think, you and me, Jess, like we would have meetings and be like, oh my gosh, I completely forgot we even talked about like having a meeting at that time, right? It was just like little things that you kept almost dropping the ball on. And
Yeah.
really, like when you think about it, procrastination can become a way to avoid confronting that memory gap. Okay, especially if you're unsure how to begin, how to like just get started with something.
Mhm.
And I think the last way that this shows up is you are not emotionally regulated. So when stress keeps building up, it messes with your emotional regulation ability, right? So you might feel anxiety, you might feel overwhelming feelings of guilt, you might be really really like frustrated, really irritable. But instead of being able to like logically deal with those feelings directly, you just again put off the task. Okay? And this is where this emotional avoidance, it again leads to more stress. Again, creating that vicious cycle where procrastination feels like a way to avoid stress, but in reality, it's just making it 10 times worse. Okay. And I think like the biggest takeaway in all of this is that the irony is that procrastination, it just creates more stress, right? Like the unfinished tasks that pile up, your to-do list that keeps growing, right? Instead of checking things off, you just keep adding more things to do. That cycle just continues. And it's kind of like trying to outrun your shadow. Like it will never ever work.
That is such a good way to look at it. It's that's a really good visual for me, the idea of trying to outrun your shadow. And again, like I want you to even just think about yourself if you're listening to this and all of the things that you feel, overwhelmed by. And I remember, being in the height of my stressful state with so much going on in work, in my relationships, with family health issues, like just so much stuff that it felt like it was overloading piece by piece by piece. And all of the things that you just mentioned, from the memory problems, like just dropping the ball, being like, oh my gosh, I forgot to respond to that email, or oh my God, I had to have this in by that deadline. I cannot believe that I forgot. I had like post-it notes everywhere, but I still could not remember to do the things, or just simple things. Like you said, that whole feeling like cognitively overloaded, right? Where I could not for the life of me prioritize what my day looked like. I think I had to come to you at one point. Do you remember that? I had to come to you at one point and it'd be like, I don't know how to structure my day anymore. And this is ridiculous because I come from, a corporate background in Manhattan, running a huge team at a huge firm, a huge advertising firm, and I can't even figure out how to structure my day or when I'm going to wash my hair. I felt fucking pathetic, Melissa.
I remember that. And I think too, you and I both experience at the same time. And it can be very frustrating and very difficult in relationships when you can't concentrate on what your partner is saying to you and you don't have the capacity to even like take in the words that they're saying. And then you just don't remember anything that you talked about. And this is why it's always like, we talked about that. I don't remember. And then arguments start and then more stress, right?
Yeah.
Like it's just this terrible cycle.
I remember at one point Joe sitting to me and being like, "You're here, but you're not here." Like, I feel like we have a conversation, you're listening. I don't know if you're absorbing. And then the next day, like, we go to talk about it and you're like a blank slate, like, you don't even remember. And that is something I've always prided myself on, is having a fantastic memory. Like, I have a memory like a bear trap. You know what I mean? Like,
We get
even
that
the
from
yeah, and we get that from mom. But that's what I'm saying. Like, I just felt so unlike myself. And when he would be like, "You're here, but you're not here," like that whole what you're talking about of like the emotional regulation part, right? Like, I would be like so angry that you're like, "You're here, but you're not here." I'm like, I have so much going on. What are you talking about? But then I'd feel so guilty of like, how can I not be present, and what's wrong with me? And I'd start to stress about like, is there something that's wrong with me? And it just felt like I was living in this cloud, that I was so foggy. I had so much shit to do. I could not for the life of me even like get out of bed, like not even take action on things. My relationships were suffering. I couldn't even like respond to a text message from mom or dad or from you. It was just
yeah.
overwhelming.
Yeah, and I mean, like when you think about it, like when that decision making gets to that point where it's so hard, right? Like stupid things, like deciding what to eat for breakfast. That
Yes.
feels so complicated that it's like I remember just being like, well, guess I'm not gonna effing eat, and then it would be like 11:30, and I was starving, and I
Yep.
would start eating in my day at like 11:30 noon, and I'd have breakfast, I'd have lunch at like 4 o'clock, and I'd be eating dinner at like 8 o'clock at night. You know what I mean? So like it was like that was difficult. Motivation is completely gone. Like the mornings where I couldn't even get out of bed, right? Or like, your brain almost kind of just like shuts down. It's like energy preservation mode. And it's like, let's not waste energy on this task. We might need that energy later. So like your motivation is completely gone.
Well,
Right.
like when during that phase two where you're saying like the motivation's completely gone, remember you and I, like, we were both in this phase of I can't even think about stepping foot into a gym, like the loud music. And going to the gym was something I love, right? I know I feel better when I do it. I know I feel refreshed after I leave, but just the thought of having to put on clothes and leave my house and step into the gym and think about all the effort, like motivation was completely gone.
Yeah. Even things like basic self-care, like
Right.
washing my hair, like just getting in the shower and having to wash my hair, and the thought of having to then take time to like fully dry my hair out afterwards when I had a laundry list of things I had been already putting off to do. And you know what I mean? It's just like all those things that, again, going back to the beginning of this episode, it just makes you feel lazy, but it's not. It's because during that time that we experienced this badly, we were like high stress, and it was chronic.
Yeah. It's really hard. So if you are listening to this and you're like, "Oh my gosh, your story relates to me so much. It resonates. I can see myself or hear myself in the words that, you're saying, and I know what that feels like to just feel like I'm in this like freeze mode scrolling on my phone, or the motivation to, jump in the shower and wash my hair just feels like it's all too much, or I want to start eating healthy. I want to start working out, but I just cannot for the life of me like take the first step for how to do it, it can, like Melissa said, it can leave you in that, cycle of just getting down on yourself. So, number one, if you're feeling that way, I want you to know there's nothing wrong with you. It's not your fault. You're not lazy, you're not unmotivated. We just have to figure out how we solve like the root of the chronic stress in your life. And that's a whole other topic for a whole other episode. That's kind of like what we have to do from a deeper layer. But on a surface level layer, we need to start to think about like what are some things that you can do to help you break that freeze mode or to help you get out of the rut of feeling like I want to take action, but I just can't. And I know that you have, like, through working through your own chronic stress, you developed what you call your 2 minute rule.
Yes, it's the 2-minute rule. And it is meant to temporarily or like almost fix the surface level to just help you get started because addressing the root issue of your chronic stress, of high cortisol, like that is a way deeper game that we have to play. But for now, all of you who are currently experiencing this, if this is resonating with you, everyone can take this and apply it immediately. Okay. So this is how the 2-minute rule works. When you are stuck in chronic stress mode, when you are procrastinating, the hardest part of doing any task, anything that you are avoiding, is just getting started. Like the hardest part, hands down, is just that first, like, starting action. Okay. And this is where the 2-minute rule comes into play. It is all about just like lowering the bar to make starting feel manageable. Okay.
Mm.
So, what I want you to do is any task that you are currently avoiding, okay, I want you to break it down into a version that you can do in 2 minutes or less. So, you don't have to commit to something that's going to take you 30 minutes or 45 minutes or 2 hours or even 15 minutes. Like I literally just want you to take whatever you're avoiding and say, what version of this can I do in the next 2 minutes or less? So for example, those of you who maybe you work a 9 to 5 and you need to meal prep for the week and you keep putting that off, and because of that you always eat lunches out, and then you're always disappointed because you didn't meal prep and you overate for the day and it wasn't the healthiest. Instead of meal prep for the week, I just want you to get your cutting board out, get a knife out, take out one vegetable, and chop up one vegetable. Okay. I can't tell you how much this has helped me. Like, there are some nights when I have been in this like freeze mode. I was like, I can't even start cooking dinner. And I would put it off until, like I said, 8 p.m. at night. But when I just be like, let me just get out one thing and just start cutting it. I don't care if it takes me 2 hours to cut this fucking like zucchini. I'm just going to start cutting it now. Before I knew it, everything was done and prepped and I made dinner. Right. But it all just started because I was like, let me just start with 2 minutes and then you keep going from there. Um, Another example would be, instead of working out for 30 minutes, right? Just put your sneakers on and just maybe do some stretches on the floor. Like you don't have to go anywhere to do that. You can literally get out of bed, you can put your sneakers on, you can sit down and just start stretching, right? Like Jess was saying, just walking into the gym sometimes felt too overwhelming. Like the music, the people, just the drive to get there, like all of that, just the process to even get to the gym felt overwhelming. But when I would just wake up and just get out of pajamas, just get dressed, and you're already in those clothes, then you just start to not even think and you just start to take the next action, the next action, the next action. Okay. But again, it all starts with starting. Um, Another example would be like instead of having to clean the whole house, like maybe your whole house is a fucking shit show, right? But you're not going to clean it right now because that's so overwhelming. So can you wipe down like the kitchen counters? Right? Can you maybe just like wipe down your bathroom counter? Can you pick one thing off the floor that you've been walking past for the past 2 weeks, looking at it, getting irritated by it? You won't pick it up, God knows why, right? Just pick it up off the floor. Do something to clean for just 2 minutes. Like set a timer, 2 minutes. When it's done, if you want to keep going, great. If you're done, fine.
Mm.
But starting creates momentum. Once you chop one vegetable, you're probably going to chop more. Once you stretch for 2 minutes and you're dressed, you're probably going to say, let me just go get a workout in, right? Your brain almost just needs like a little nudge to shift out of that procrastination mode. And once it's past that little hump, then that's when you can keep going.
I love this rule. And it's so like it's so stupid. I'm not saying it in a mean way. It's so stupid. It's so simple. Like it's stupid simple. But if you think about it, when you are in that freeze mode, when you are in that like I can't do anything because everything just feels so overwhelming, that's almost what you need. You need something that's stupid simple because trying to think through anything that is complicated, your brain, like physiologically, is not allowing you to do that. There's nothing wrong with you. This is what your brain was designed to do. This is what happens to your brain when it's in a state of chronic stress. So it's almost like you can't think your way out of it, right? Like taking action. So sometimes you just need to physically take action. And that's really where I love where you say to set a timer for 2 minutes, because even if you are feeling extremely overwhelmed, you can do anything for 2 minutes. 2 minutes is a manageable amount of time. And what I've found, like when you told me about this rule, I started doing it in my own life. And it's even helped when it comes to things like work, right? I used to be the person where, and this is probably what led to the chronic stress, is as soon as I woke up in the morning, the first thing I would do is check my phone. And I would, all of the messages are like, oh my God, I have to get back to this client and I have to get back to one of our coaches and you need something from me and mom has a text and, work is piling up, all of these things. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, my list of to-dos. And I would roll out of bed in my pajamas and open up my laptop and start working, right? And that was my life for so long until the point where I crashed and burned. And then it became, I can't even open my laptop. I can't even think about getting started. I don't know which task to start with. I don't know what to do. And so one of the things that you've helped me with this 2 minute rule is coming up with like, all right, well, what is one task that if I just set a timer and I start for 2 minutes on, maybe it's writing an email, right? So I'm just going to set my timer for 2 minutes. I'm just going to start getting out like an idea for an email. And every single time, like clockwork, it turns into this is really not so bad. I've just built it up in my brain and my head to feel like there's no way I can tackle this task right now when really I just need to get started.
I think you just said this is you can't think your way out of procrastination. It happens by taking action. And Tony Robbins actually talks about this where he says you need to change your physical state. So the way that you do that is by setting a timer. It's a low commitment. It's 2 minutes. If you hate it after 2 minutes, great, you don't have to do it anymore. Chances are, because you've been putting it off, once you start, you're gonna keep going after that. So just remember that whenever in the future or even like later today when you do find yourself procrastinating, I know those of us who are like really anal, we're control freaks, we think that we know everything. You can't think your way out of procrastinating. You just have to take action.
Exactly. And I do want to go back to the reminder that again, procrastination, it's a symptom, right? It's a symptom of being chronically stressed. Procrastination is not the problem. The problem is your chronic stress. So, your 2 minute rule, Melissa, right? That's almost like that's something that can help the symptom in the moment. It's almost like a band-aid, right? You scratch your knee, you cut your finger open, you're going to slap a band-aid on it to stop the bleeding in the moment, right? But if I shot you and you got a bullet hole, you're not gonna like slap a band-aid on it because it's going to keep bleeding. You have to actually remove the bullet, you have to go get stitches, you have to solve the actual problem, right? The band-aid's not going to help. So while the 2 minute rule can be something that's almost like a helpful solution to get you out of this rut of procrastination, it's not the long term fix that most of you need if you are in a chronic stress state, right? In order to truly break that cycle of being chronically stressed, you have to tackle the root cause of your chronic stress and of chronically high cortisol. And I mean, again, like I said, this is a conversation for a different podcast. how you actually work on calming your nervous system, right? That is so important. Like that's going to be one of the first steps of calming yourself from the inside out. Making actual lifestyle changes to your sleep hygiene, to your movement patterns, to your nutrition. All of those things play a role in, rebalancing your body and reducing stress. And even lifestyle changes like your morning routine, your nighttime routine, the boundaries that you set, all of those things will actually tackle the root problem. But that's not something we're going to get into this podcast. But I just want you to know that if you are stuck in this procrastination state, it is a symptom of the high stress. And there are things that you're going to need to do to tackle the root cause. But hopefully, this 2-minute rule is something that can help to get you out of the rut or get you taking action. That way, you're not just in this like stress spiral of procrastination, essentially.
And again, if this has resonated with you so much, number one, I do want you to try, as Jess calls it, my stupid simple 2-minute rule. But if you are like, you know what, I need more help, like I know that I need help addressing that root cause, and you're ready to start to uncover that, because it's going to take a lot of work to kind of, uncover everything and then start to fix it. That's kind of a long road ahead, but it is very doable. Just shoot us an email, just reach out. We're here to help you. This is exactly what we work on with all of our clients, is helping them optimize their lifestyle, help them to calm down their nervous systems and figure out a way to almost like restructure and retrain their brain to not be stuck in chronic stress, to know that there is a different way of living, and it feels so much lighter on the other side. So if you are that person, if you do need more help than just surface level, please reach out. We'll just have a conversation, kind of hear you out, hear what's going on, and figure out a solution to help you.
Yeah, I love that. And again, I just want to reiterate because when I was going through this period, I felt very alone. And I know that even though like I had you, you were kind of dealing with your own chronic stress, we could kind of commiserate with each other. So I didn't feel so alone or like there was so much something wrong with me. But then I started being like, there's something wrong with both of us, right? Like, it's an us problem. We're both broken. Um, so if you are dealing with this and you don't have someone else where you're like, well, she has it too, so it's not just a me thing, it's an us thing. I want you to know that you are not alone. I listened to a podcast the other day and it's something crazy. Like a new study came out that something like 70% of people are saying they're living in a state of chronic stress. And there was a study from the UK that came out that said 90% of people feel like they're living in chronic burnout. So that, I mean, again, that's for a whole other podcast episode. But if you are procrastinating, it's not because you're lazy. Your brain is just trying to protect you. The good news is, like Melissa said, you can retrain it. If you are listening to this, try the 2-minute rule this week, right? Just start really small, pick one task, break it down, and give yourself permission to just take action for 2 minutes. I think you're going to be surprised by how much you actually can accomplish. And if you are in a place where you do need the help and support, come join our app, come join our community of women. We are all tackling this together. You can find it in any of the app stores. You're just going to look for the LUMINÜ app. Remember to put the two U's over or to the two dots over the U. In German, it's called an Umlaut. So, just make sure you search for LUMINÜ, put the two dots over the U. You'll find it in any of the app stores. And you can actually come join our community, network with women who are going through the same thing and find some more resources, free guides, things like that on how to get started.